Let's dive right into this explainer and see what actually happens when the pristine, organized world of ancient texts collides head-on with the messy, physical dirt of history. We're going on an archaeological investigation into the ancient Near East today. We're going to look at how the actual physical artifacts we dig out of the ground absolutely revolutionize how we understand some of the most heavily analyzed ancient texts in human history. It's like putting together a giant puzzle where half the pieces were buried for millennia.
So here's our investigation board for today. We've got 6 key areas: unearthed, dirt meets text, Yahweh and his Asherah, the tiny silver scrolls, discovering Joshua's altar, the Dead Sea Scrolls, and finally, Ugarit's poetic secrets. Let's get right to it.
Section 1. Unearthed. Dirt meets text. To kick things off, we really need to establish the scene of the crime, so to speak, and understand exactly what happens the moment an archaeologist's spade hits the ground.
You know, it's rarely as simple as just digging up a giant signpost that perfectly explains a historical event. Instead, the crucial point is that we're looking for intersections, or what we call convergences. A convergence is exactly that point where hard, physical dirt and artifacts meet up with, interact with, and clarify ancient texts. Sometimes we get these broad convergences that just kind of paint a general cultural backdrop for us. But other times, oh man, we hit a narrow convergence. And when that happens, it is a profound, literal game changer, where the physical dirt validates or completely challenges the very words we've been reading for centuries.
Section 2, Yahweh and his Asherah. Let's head out to our first case in the scorching Sinai Peninsula at this ancient truck stop, technically a caravanserai, known as Kuntalet Ajrud.
Picture this. It's out in the middle of the desert, a place where exhausted travelers, merchants, and maybe soldiers would stop to rest. It's hot, it's isolated, and well, it happens to hold a massive secret. When archaeologists excavated this modest little site back in the 1970s, they found these large storage jars, known as piphoi, absolutely covered in traditional Canaanite iconography. Lots and lots of pictures. But interspersed right in with those drawings was some incredibly controversial graffiti. We're talking about a very specific votive inscription that honestly shook the academic world.
I bless you by Yahweh of Samaria and his Asherah. I mean, wow, this shocked researchers because it directly links the divine name of Yahweh with the noun Asherah. What we're looking at is hard physical proof of the rampant religious syncretism, that mixing and matching of beliefs that the classical biblical prophets were constantly complaining about on the ground. You've got an individual right here invoking a blessing not just by Yahweh, but by Yahweh and another entity, permanently tied together in the dirt.
Now, trying to crack this grammatical mystery is like a puzzle, and scholars mostly debate 3 distinct interpretations of the consonants. See, in ancient Hebrew grammar, adding a possessive his to a proper name like Asherah is super unusual. It just doesn't really work. So some folks argue it must refer to a wooden pole, a physical cultic symbol representing the pagan goddess. Others, like scholar Rick Hess, argue it's actually an archaic double feminine ending, which would translate simply to Yahweh and Asherah, totally bypassing that problematic his. But honestly, whether it's a wooden pole or an archaic ending, the huge takeaway is exactly the same. This physical evidence perfectly matches the chaotic, blended religious environment those ancient texts were warning us about.
Section 3, the tiny silver scrolls. Next up, we are traveling over to Ketef Hinnom. It's this incredibly sophisticated burial site overlooking the Hinnom Valley, right outside Jerusalem.
In ancient times, burials were a whole multi-step process, and families would store the belongings of the deceased in these special repositories tucked beneath the burial benches. This find is just a brilliant illustration of how hard physical evidence can completely collapse a giant, widely accepted academic theory. For the longest time, the dominant 19th century theory, championed by Julius Wellhausen, was that all these complex priestly laws and texts were composed super late, like entirely post-exilic late. But the artifacts sitting right there in this Iron Age tomb turn that entire theory completely upside down.
While sifting through the dirt in that repository, workers found this tiny silver amulet. Honestly, it kind of looked like a crushed cigarette butt at first glance, but when they took it to a lab and painstakingly unrolled it, this tiny 10-centimeter cracked silver scroll revealed the priestly Levitical blessing from Numbers chapter 6. No way, right? It's literally the earliest scriptural quotation ever discovered. This proved, without a shadow of a doubt, that these priestly traditions were culturally active and authoritative way before the exile. I mean, an average citizen was wearing these very words right around their neck.
Section 4. discovering Joshua's altar. So let's head up to Mount Ebal in the Central Highlands. Here, archaeologist Adam Zertal stumbled upon what might just be a massive, incredibly narrow convergence.
Back in the 1980s, while doing a survey, Zertal noticed a structure that looked suspiciously like a giant altar on a mountain famously associated with covenant renewals. Let's actually stack this evidence up step by step and see if this ancient installation meets the criteria for a very specific biblical structure. First off, the pottery dates it to the Iron One period, which lines up with the Israelite settlement perfectly. Second, the construction is perfectly square and features a ramp, not stairs. This aligns exactly with the textual laws given for altars. Third, they found just tons of ash buried underneath it. And fourth, they uncovered thousands of animal bones, and every single one was exclusively from kosher animals eligible for cultic sacrifice. Literally 0 pig bones.
I mean, if it walks like a nuck and quacks like a duck, or in this case, looks exactly like Joshua's altar, when the architectural footprint aligns this perfectly with the textual descriptions, the visual case becomes really hard to ignore. You can see the ramp, the clear demarcation of holy space, and that distinct square shape. For many scholars, this is a rare, thrilling instance of a direct, narrow convergence. This could very well be the actual altar described in the book of Joshua.
Section 5. The Dead Sea Scrolls. Now our investigation takes us into the shadowy caves of Qumran in the 1940s.
The story behind the Dead Sea Scrolls is absolutely wild. It involves Bedouins stumbling into a cave by accident, decades of frustrating bureaucratic delays, full-blown conspiracy theories, and finally a group of rogue grad students in Cincinnati who actually used an early desktop computer to force the public release of these hidden texts so the world could finally study them. Just take a second and imagine the sheer eye-burning labor required to piece together these tiny, crumbling textual fragments. Scholars spent decades meticulously matching fragile edges and translating microscopic fading letters. But the payoff? It was monumental. They definitively proved that first-century Judaism was not just one monolithic thing. It was actually this huge, diverse umbrella of multiple traditions.
This timeline really helps visualize the highly complex process of how we got our canon. You see, oral and administrative texts from early eras were compiled and standardized during the Iron Age. Then, for centuries, they were transmitted by hand copying. And let's be real, hand copying inevitably introduces human errors and variations. The Dead Sea Scrolls give us a perfect snapshot of concurrent traditions right before the final post-Qumran standardization. For instance, they found a version of Jeremiah that is 1/7 shorter than the one we have today. It shows us exactly how textual criticism relies on these very variations to reverse engineer the entire evolution of the Old Testament.
Section 6. Ugarit's Poetic Secrets. For our final cold case today, we are traveling over to the modern-day Syrian coast, to the ancient, bustling, cosmopolitan city of Ugarit.
This place was discovered completely by accident when a farmer's plow just happened to strike a royal grave. Unearthing the local priest's libraries there completely shifted our perspective. Look at how Israelite and Judean cultures basically theologize familiar Canaanite poetic structures. They didn't invent this stuff in a vacuum. A famous Canaanite hymn praises the agricultural deity Baal as the one, quote, riding on the clouds. Then we look at later Israelite theology, like in the book of Daniel, and Yahweh is described with that exact same imagery, coming riding on the clouds. They took familiar cultural concepts and powerfully reapplied them to Yahweh. It's absolutely fascinating how intertwined these neighboring cultures truly were. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a really provocative thought to chew on. We've looked at ancient truck stops covered in messy, syncretic graffiti. We've seen tiny, crushed silver amulets hiding in dusty tombs. And we've uncovered poetry borrowed directly from neighboring civilizations. It's incredibly clear that our ancient texts were born within a vibrant, chaotic, and deeply human world. So if understanding the physical dirt of history fundamentally shapes the words we still read today, how does that physical reality change the way you read those texts tomorrow?